Namaste. Amen and blessed be. I want to thank you for sharing with us all the names of those loved ones who have died. Each one of us carries a list of at least a few names that inform our lives. For some of you, I know the list is far too long for that short ritual. Those memories that you carry with you are the foundation of today's worship service. Those memories and the lives well lived are what we celebrate today. It's almost as if by naming them aloud together, we bring their memories here with us today. This is the time of the year that we recognize the bounty of harvest and celebrate the dead. In the Christian and Catholic liturgical calendar, there's All Saints' Day and All Souls' Day. More and more people around here are celebrating Dia de los Muertos, or the Day of the Dead. And of course, there's the wonderful holiday of Halloween. For so many people, this is a time of remembering the dead, to honor them and to reflect on how their lives continue to contribute to our own. The Reverend John Wolfe, the minister of the church where I grew up, was fond of speaking of the great cloud of witnesses. The phrase comes from the Bible. It's from Hebrews 12. It says, "Therefore, since we're surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and the sin that clings so closely, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us." With a great cloud of witnesses, of those we have known and loved, we can live with courage and hopefully up to some of their ideals. Because we've learned from their strength, because we've been inspired by their lives, we can go on. The great cloud of witnesses points to the fact that those who have died are still with us today in our gathering here. This Sunday, I want to invite you to think of that great cloud of witnesses in a more specific way. Some of you, I know, have lost many, many people over the decades. Today, I want to ask you, though, to focus on a few. Focus on 3 or 4 whose memory has the greatest influence on your life. What I'm really asking is, who's on your team? In the struggle and the joy of life, among this great cloud of witnesses, who are the few that you want to call on for help? There are a few ways that you might think of this question. One is, who played a significant role in your life, such a significant role that they continue to influence your living, even after they're gone? That's what we commonly think of in the great cloud of witnesses. You might also consider who you would like to have inspire your life more. Who are the heroes that you would hope to emulate? They may be people you know, or maybe people you've only read about. The third option that comes to mind is people that inspire you but may not have had the full chance to live the life that they might have lived. Perhaps part of your living is done for them since they didn't have the chance. So I never write a sermon or ask you something that I'm not willing to seriously consider myself. So I asked myself the same question, and was a little bit surprised by some of the answers that I came up with. One of the people I would name on my team is James Reeb. He was a Unitarian minister who became a bit of a hero in our tradition. But it was his early career that inspires me the most. What I admire about him was his commitment to building beloved community, not to building big churches. Ministry, like any other career, is very aspirational. Depending on your experience, your talent, your effort, and honestly, your marketability, ministers rise up through the ranks to larger and larger congregations and leadership positions. As a young, white, upper-middle-class man, I was groomed to desire that kind of ladder climbing. If I'm completely honest, it's still a little part of me. But reading about James Reeb offered a different vision of ministry. I first read about him when I was preparing for ordination. Those years were a time of sort of chewing on what kind of minister I wanted to be, or what kind of career I expected, or how I would measure success. James Reeb began his career in 1953, ordained as a Presbyterian minister. Shortly after that, he shifted over to become a Unitarian. That was partially based on his theology, but also based on his commitment to the civil rights movement. And he knew that the Unitarian Church was where the action was happening in those days. As a Unitarian, he encouraged his members to participate in the civil rights movement, and he encouraged them by walking his talk. With his wife and 4 children, he lived in poor black neighborhoods where he felt that he could do the most good. His first job as a Unitarian minister he took because it allowed him to continue working with the YMCA in Philadelphia, to work with their youth. Shortly after that, he became an assistant minister at All Souls in Washington, D.C. That congregation still has a reputation for bridging the racial divide in that city. 3 years after that, he moved his family to Boston to work with Quakers who were desegregating housing and working to protect tenants' rights. Again, he chose to live with his white family in a neighborhood of poor people of color. He was adamant that you can't make a difference for African Americans while living comfortably in a white community. That's the piece of James Reeb's story that inspires me. His life and ministry were so clearly focused on building beloved community. That's not what he's famous for, though. In 1965, Reeb followed Martin Luther King's call to Selma, Alabama. After eating dinner at an integrated restaurant, James Reeb and 2 other Unitarian ministers were attacked and beaten with clubs as they walked home. A series of delays, mostly due to segregation and a horrible medical system, meant that he didn't receive treatment for his severe head injuries for hours and hours. He did not survive. His death, though, resulted in a national outcry against the activities of white racists in the Deep South. Of course, I never met James Reeb. I only know him through reading. Something about his ministry, though, not his death, but his ministry, inspires me. It's a sort of call to integrity and a reminder of the impact you can make on the world when you live your values boldly. The second person on my team wasn't a surprise at all. It's my grandmother, Irene Wood. She stands out for a few reasons. One is that I spent a huge amount of time with her as a child. She was the go-to babysitter for my parents. Next to my own parents, she probably had the biggest influence on my life. I think she continues to stand out, though, for all these years because she was such a dynamic, multifaceted person. I'll never forget a phone call with her when I was in Washington, D.C. just after college. I was there for an internship. And she told me about when she had gone to Washington, D.C. at a similar age. Now, to understand this, you have to know a little bit about her background. She came from a working-class family in rural Mississippi. I'm almost certain that she did not have a bachelor's degree. But during World War II, she had the gumption to travel from Mississippi to Washington, D.C. to work as a secretary to support the war effort. I didn't even know this piece of history except through talking with her. Apparently, the administrative need during the war was so huge that they set up a whole series of prefabricated mobile office buildings on the Mall in Washington. Hearing about that story, I saw her in a totally different light. It's only in adulthood that I have come to understand how remarkable it was that she had a whole career as a bookkeeper in that age. She was also a kind person. In her 70s, she volunteered with local counseling hotlines and was known for helping her older neighbors. But kindness didn't mean that she was meek or quiet. She was a hot-tempered Southern gal with a colorful and gritty vocabulary. And she was loyal to the core. Again, this isn't something that I really understood until more recently. Without going into detail, she held together a really complicated family through some rough times. She's on my team, not for being perfect or being inspiring in one particular way of being in the world. My grandmother is on my team as a reminder of how complicated life is and how navigating it well requires us to wear many different hats. She didn't sit on the sidelines. She dove in and did what needed to get done. She couldn't bake a pie to save her life, but she was a pretty amazing grandma and woman. The last one, the unexpected person on my list of who's on my team, was Matthew Shepard. It's certainly not because I want to be like him, or even that I have a particular respect for him as a person, but I realized this week what a deep mark his death had played in my own life. You probably know Matthew Shepard, a gay man, was beaten and murdered in 1998 in Laramie, Wyoming. He was a college student at a rural state school. In 1998, I was also a college student, 2 years younger than Matthew. Like a whole generation of young gay men, it was impossible not to take those events very personally. I was a freshman in college. On a whim, I had agreed to become the leader of our campus LGBT student group. So in the wake of his death, we all knew something had to be done. I called around the progressive religious groups in the community. Not a single faith leader was available or willing to help organize a vigil. Not a single faith leader was there to help frightened LGBT students grieve together. So I, along with a couple of my friends, organized it and led it. I don't know how many people were there, but it felt like a couple of hundred. And that night, creating a sacred space for a community that so desperately needed a place and a time to be together was a major stepping stone on my pathway to ministry. The other way his life and death impacted me was as a challenge to live fully as myself. In 1998, Matthew was out in a very hostile environment. He paid an incredible price for his courage in a way that I still can't put into words. A part of me feels like I owe it to him. I owe it to all my LGBT ancestors, especially him, to live fully and openly every day, because they paid such a price for freedom. I know it's an unusual person to claim on my team. Perhaps you've also been shaped by lives cut short. Perhaps they inform your life now, not because of who they were, but because of who they could have been had they had the opportunity. So I've shared my memories with you, not because there's a great lesson in my life. I share these as examples of the different types of people and memories that might make up your great cloud of witnesses, your team of people who have died, those who still influence your life. So in the next day or so, maybe this afternoon, think about it. Don't just name the obvious ones. Think about the 3 or 4 people who have deeply influenced your life. Who are they? And just as importantly, why do you call on them? Do you want to invoke their courage and wisdom or compassion? Was their life a lesson or a warning? What's their role in your great cloud of witnesses? Therefore, since we're surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin that clings so closely, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. Amen.